Hello there guys, and welcome to another one of my reviews here on my channel. Today we're gonna have a discussion that's been carried on online for a very long time, and that is, should you go for an M550 or should you go for the real deal for the M5? The reason why a lot of people are asking themselves this question is related a lot to the specs of these two cars. Because if you don't know a lot about the way the M division preps its engines, you will think that this car basically has the same engine as an M5, because it's also a 4.4 liter twin turbo V8. And furthermore, the torque figure is exactly the same. While an M5 has 750 Newton meters of torque, the M550 also has 750 Newton meters of torque. That will be about 513 pound-feet of torque if you're living in the US. So that raises a lot of eyebrows to a lot of people. They're not necessarily unknowing people, it's just that there are some tricks in between these numbers that you need to take into consideration. For if you only relate to the torque, even the M5 CS, which is a 635 horsepower rare edition version of the M5, also has 750 Newton meters of torque, and that comes from the gearbox, because the gearbox, the 8-speed ZF gearbox used in these cars, has a torque limit. It happens on a lot of cars and a lot of components, so BMW is not the only one using this sort of solution. So it has a limit of 750 Newton meters of torque. Of course, some of you will be asking, but what about all those tuned cars? The gearbox can handle more. But the engineers arrived at the conclusion that if you want this car to be viable and drive it for a long time, 750 Newton meters of torque is the limit at which you should take it. Sure, you can get 800, 1000 Newton meters of torque and the gearbox will hold up, but not for very long. So with that said, what car should you get between these two? Well, if you ask me, it will depend on a number of factors. Most of all, it will depend on how much comfort you want out of your car, because this is the biggest difference in between the two. Sure, the M5 looks more aggressive, but the differences are very small. The M5 also is faster because it has more power. The M5 also drives different because it has a different suspension, and most importantly, the M5 drives different because it has a different all-wheel drive system. This car also has xDrive, but the M5 has xDrive, which means you can decouple the front axle and send all the power to the rear axle. In all honesty, few people are actually using that option though, because when you turn your M5 into a rear-wheel drive car, what happens is you have to turn off the DSC system. And when you have 600 horsepower at your disposal, that's a very risky proposal. So most people will use the four-wheel drive or four-wheel drive sport mode. So, having driven both the M5 competition and the M550i, what would be my choice, and how do I see these cars different in any way? Well, the biggest difference you're going to notice is just how much more comfortable the M550i is. This is a very refined car. It has a very refined ride. The suspension works flawlessly. It is incredibly comfortable, soaks up the bumps easily. Very few potholes actually give it any trouble. You have to hit a really massive pothole in order to hear a thump and feel some discomfort inside the car. But this car was obviously set up to be very comfortable, whereas in the M5, well, the ride is a lot harsher. You hear a lot more noise inside it from the wheels and the suspension, because everything was stiffened up to keep the body in control a lot better on the edge. And this thing is very comfortable, and I think it has all the performance you could ever need. 530 horsepower are more than enough for any given day of the week, and you will do 100 kilometers an hour from standstill in just 3.8 seconds. Now remember, this was supercar territory not too long ago. This is a very fast car, and independent measurings have shown that this is an even faster car than what BMW claims at 3.8 seconds. We've seen it hit 100 kilometers an hour in as low as 3.5 seconds. So it is fast, but that also happens on the M5, because the M5 is claimed to hit 100 kilometers an hour in a bit over 3 seconds, 3.2 seconds, and we've seen it drop under the 3-second mark. So that applies in that case as well. But this car is a lot more comfortable. So I think if you're going to be choosing between them, you're gonna have to ask yourself, most of all, just how you're gonna drive these cars. Because if you're gonna spend most of your time driving on the highway or driving around town, like most of us do, this car is a better choice in my book, because I prefer a bit more comfort in my car. I'm at a certain age, I know I'm speaking like a really old guy, but I'm at a certain age where I prefer comfort over a sportier feeling. So for me, personally, this car would be more than enough, and I would actually pick it over the M5 because of its comfort. I would get the M5 seats, because on the facelift model you can now get M Sport seats that look very, very much like the ones on the M5. There are some small differences between them, but they look alike. They're very comfortable and offer better side support than these seats, these M Sport seats that come as standard on the M550i. But I would prefer this suspension a lot more to the one found on the M5 or the M5 competition, which is even still stiffer. Sure, on the track these two will be quite apart in terms of performance. The M5 does keep its weight in check a lot better, and when you push this car to the edge and the M5 to the edge, this car just kind of falls apart. It feels a lot, it has a lot more body roll, it leans a lot more in the corners compared to the M5, which is basically glued to the road. But both cars have plenty of grip. Both cars have plenty of grip both on the front axle and on the rear axle. Both cars can slide the rear ends when you accelerate hard into a corner, so you can oversteer very easily. The steering system in the M5 is a bit better. It has a bit more feedback, if you ask me. The brakes are brilliant in both cars. So there are very few differences in between them, and I think you would only notice these differences when you would track them. If you go to the track with both of them side to side and back to back, that's when you will notice the differences. Because if you're gonna drive this car and then the M5 like 6 months later, you will notice, I mean, you'd have to be a very good driver to notice and remember the differences between them. I still remember the M5 and the M5 competition, how stiff they were, how planted they were compared to this car. But this is my job, I drive cars for a living, and it's normal to remember that. But for an average driver, they will have a hard time remembering that. And when you're on the track with the M550i and doing eye-watering speeds and having lots of fun, you can very easily forget about how capable the M5 is. So if you're asking me for my opinion between these two cars, considering the price difference, which is roughly 30,000 euros here in Europe, I think I would rather go with the M550i because of its extra comfort, and because it has plenty of performance already. You don't really need any more. But if you're gonna track these cars, if you're gonna go to the track day to day, or maybe, I don't know, at least twice a month, I think the M5 might be a better choice for you. But considering my lifestyle and how rarely I get to the track, I think the M550i would be enough. And even if I needed more power just to match an M5 in a drag race from a stoplight, that's like the most racing people will normally do, even though it's not really legal or okay to do on public roads, you can easily tune this engine to 600 or 625 horsepower and match an M5 in a straight line acceleration. So that wouldn't really be an issue. The only advantage the M5 has, which is also its main disadvantage, as I said, is the body control on the track. but that comes with a trade-off, and that is the lack of comfort on public roads. And there's one more advantage the M5 has, which is the sound, because it sounds a bit better than this car, mainly because it has extra volume, because the sound is the same, but the M5 is louder than the M550i, which is specifically designed to be more toned down in this regard. I hope this helps anyone who's having any thoughts about buying one of these cars and it's in a conundrum. Don't forget to share your thoughts about this matter in the comment section below. This is more of a comparison than a review, actually, but I am very curious about which one you would get in between these two cars. Don't forget, of course, to like, share, and of course subscribe to the channel to keep it alive. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. It's fine by me. But if you give me a thumbs down, at least you could share your thoughts on the matter. What would you pick and why you didn't like this video? Until next time, don't forget to feed your passions. Ciao.